Welcome to We're Not Wizards. We are the best, but not wizards. Enjoy the show!
To another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I'll be your host for June. Right here in June, it's singing a lovely tune. There's something singing a lovely tune in the background just now, but we'll get onto that in an absolute second. There's something chirping away like it's like the happiest thing in the world. Now, the last time that we all got together, my good friends, we had Tori Brown. They were on the episode. Now, they did make a couple of comments. So, in this kind of situation, I think it's right that you have to you can't just have one person there. You've got to go the full Fort Circle and bring on Kevin Bertram, who is like the founder, he's the owner, he's the big kahuna, he's the intelligent cheese, he's the big boss, he's the main man, he's the bright shiny star in the chirpy sky. So from Fort Circle Games, I've got Kevin Bertram. So how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I have to be honest, today has really been a day of new knowledge. Right. In preparation, I was looking up famous Scottish people. And I know like some of the big ones, right? Robert Burns, David Tennant. But Calvin Harris is Scottish. I had no idea. Yeah. So, yeah.
Sean Connery.
I've heard of him too, yes.
Most of the doctors that are part of Doctor Who, all the good ones are Scottish. Peter Capaldi. Peter Capaldi. Even, your man Sylvester McCoy. That was towards the end of the kind of the Doctor type of era where they were doing lots of their stuff. They did lots of their filming in like kind of quarries and warehouses with kind of like inflated rubber gloves for bad guys and stuff like that. But they kind of did their best at the time.
I think Colin Baker's when it started to really get a little off the rails bad. Peter Davison wasn't terrible, but I had grown up on the Third Doctor, John Pertwee, and so I know everyone else is a Tom Baker, and like obviously I have a lot of respect for him, but like it's just interesting. And then that big hiatus, and now I'm glad it's back. So, and now my daughter can enjoy it. So,
well, the first Doctor I remember, and it was the strangest episode ever. It was the regeneration of Tom Baker into, is it Peter Davison? So yes. I'd never seen Doctor Who before. So my first, and like in those days when I was growing up, there wasn't such a thing as the internet. I mean, now kids, if they're going in to watch a first thing, they've already watched about 5 YouTube videos about the stuff. They've probably read the Wikipedia. They've gone on to watch kind of TikToks and reaction videos to different episodes, so they know kind of what they're getting into. And I think it was one of the first, and the Master was in it. And it was, Master. And he was still into shrinking people at the time. But I remember seeing this regeneration and this guy kind of seeming to die and then kind of get up, being a completely different person altogether. And that was my kind of first foray into Doctor Who. Welcome to We're Not Whovians. Well, we'll be discussing the latest news. I don't know. It's an exciting time. I don't know if they're kind of starting. It's almost like I'm quite excited for the potential new series. I'm pretty excited to see David Tennant back even if it is for like a special episode. Pretty excited to see him coming back.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm pretty excited to see what kind of happens after that as well, where they're going to take the direction. And I think I'm more excited because they've got a decent writer back in.
Yes.
Because Jodie was good, but I think Jodie got robbed by some really, really bad kind of writing, I think.
And I think that was true I had higher hopes for Peter Capaldi. I think that the writing wasn't great for him. So, but I really, so the first episode my wife saw was a David Tennant season. It was the one where, with, not Marie Antoinette, but, whatever, the Mistress to the King, Madame Pompadour. And
All right, okay.
that set a high standard. And
Yeah.
so, those early of the reboot were fantastic. And so the later seasons, we just haven't been as super engaged with it. So, but yeah, there's high hopes. So
yeah, we'll see kind of what happens. What we like to do in the show, apart from obviously go off on mad tangents that are kind of obviously orange coloured and beautiful, is I got a couple of questions. Okay, I'm going to start off with the logo. Okay.
sure.
Is that meant to be a boot? Is that meant to be a boot, or is that some kind of American kind of shape of a state kind of thing that I'm not getting?
So I live in the District of Columbia, which is not a state. We do not.
Right.
We can vote for president, but we don't have senators or congressmen. So it's
Right.
sort of taxation without representation. And so those of us who live in DC have a very strong affinity for the district. And so that shape is the shape of the District of Columbia, which used to be a full diagonal. It used to be and then because it had been made up of part of Maryland and part of Virginia. And then in the 1830s, I think the Virginia part got given back to Virginia. And so the remaining part is just the Maryland part that was given to create the National Capital District. And that's what that logo is. That's what the logo is.
Because I was wondering.
Yeah.
I was going to wonder, where's the boot come into it then? Because it does look like it's something kind of kicking.
And a little side note also, Fort Circle is was the string of defensive forts that protected the capital during the Civil War from the Confederacy. So it all ties back into the history and geography of Washington, D.C. So,
Have you always been a history kind of buff? Have you always been into your history? Was it something you've grown into? Because I think it's like one of these. I think it's either something you're interested in or you get into from a pretty early age, and then you go off and study it, or it's something that you kind of take up, like building a model railway or learning how to ski, that you then go, right, I'm going to take this part of history and I'm going to learn kind of everything about it. Have you always been kind of interested in history?
Yes. I've always liked history. I mean, and growing up, I was playing, I didn't play Candyland with my dad. Like, we kicked it off with games like Feudal and then, Risk and then Axis and Allies. And so, I enjoyed playing games about history, but I also enjoyed history. That's the bulk of the reading that I do is historical reading. So, and I've actually found that, well, I was younger and I was always like, oh, World War II or whatever the big things are. But now I'm kind of interested in like offbeat topics like the banana trade in the Caribbean or the history of the guano trade. We actually have a game that's coming out on that. You know what guano is, right?
Yeah, so it's not like bat droppings, basically, isn't it? Yeah.
Mostly birds, but yeah, bats too.
Yeah, okay.
So it was the most valuable. It was more valuable than gold because it was the best fertilizer before we had artificial fertilizers. And the wealthiest non-noble in England in the late 1800s was this guy, Mr. Gibbs.
Yeah.
I think Robert Gibbs. And so there's a school ditty like Mr. Gibbs made his dibs selling the turds of foreign birds. And I'm like, like that's history, right? So you got to embrace that kind of weird history. Yeah. So yes.
Gee, I mean, you mentioned that, but as you find it, I mean, is there kind of like weird stuff that kind of like you go, oh, that makes kind of like so much kind of sense? Because what I find is when they teach history at school, they almost kind of like teach history to kind of reinforce a certain message.
Yeah.
Do you know, as in they're teaching kind of like you learn, obviously, you cover like World War II, World War One. And it's like, well, this is the breakdown of the kind of the Turkish Empire, and this is why this was bad. And this is like the German Empire trying to expand, and that's why this is bad. And this is why we all came in and we all won and we were all wonderful. And then let's move on to World War II. but the message seems to kind of like be reinforcing it reinforces all the good bits, but they generally kind of miss out all of the bad stuff that kind of goes
Yeah.
against kind of what happened at the same time. I mean, history seems to be a kind of a, what was it? The great, the great. I always remember. I don't know why I remember this line, but there's a line that Flavor Flav says, and he says, "Remember, it's history, not his story." And obviously, Terry Pratchett also says that history is always written by the victors as well. So, in your journey as you go on, is there really kind of unusual bits of history that you've went, oh, we're kind of taught something a little, or we're teaching our kids kind of something slightly different from that's not strictly kind of true?
Well, what I find is whenever I read a newspaper about some fairly technical subject, it is in broad brushes correct and in the details all wrong. And I feel like history education is sort of the same way. Like the broad brushes are correct, right? Like the Allies won World War II, right? Like that, they cover that well, but like why things really happen, what the interconnections are, they're either brushed over or ignored. So, when you do a deep dive into a historical subject, it's pretty eye-opening because like our, Tories gave votes for women.
Yeah.
She went into much better detail, so I shouldn't even try to tread that ground. But like, the overview is like, oh yeah, there are these two upper class white women. They agitated. Boom, we have votes for women. Right? And the story is a lot more difficult and a lot more, complicated than that. But I guess at school, right, you're just trying to give the broad brushstrokes to kids. So I guess.
So what did you do in terms of academic side in your life? Did you go on to then kind of, what was it you went on to kind of study? Because Tori mentioned that you guys kind of like met at college. So
yes,
what was it you were doing yourself?
So I studied history and philosophy as an undergrad, and then I dropped out because that was in the mid 90s. Well, I didn't drop out. I went to graduate school, and it turns out I was missing some classes for my undergraduate degree. So I dropped out of graduate school, but that was in the mid 90s. So I started working in the technology industry. And then I was going back to take the classes that I was missing when I was 29 and Tori was 17. And,
right.
Yeah. And I've known her, well, I'm not sure if I should disclose how old I am, hence how old she is. But let's say it's been for a while. So I'm not 29 anymore. And so.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a super academic. Like I love reading and I love the history of it, but I never loved college, which I mean I love parts of it, but those were usually around sports and drinking.
I always fight. I don't know. I always butt heads with the education system because I know there's a lot of people that have had that their entire life has been defined by them having a very, very good day on an exam or a very, very bad day on an exam. And there's a lot of people out there that kind of like, they woke up, they had a cold, they woke up, they'd just broken up with their short-term or long-term girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And they went then they just didn't understand one single thing that kind of wrecked their entire course. And then they went in, studied an exam, had a bad day, and then that kind of defined their life. And I think that education is, I have kind of not strange views, but I think education itself should be open to everybody. I think people should be, even if they're kind of like, no matter what kind of getting job, there should be kind of the ability for somebody to say, I'd like to find out more about this, and for it not to necessarily be kind of gatekept as much as it is. I hate the fact that education itself is kind of gatekept behind like some kind of financial barrier. Especially if people do want to study, there's a lot of people that are stopped from kind of studying because they don't have the money to do it.
Oh,
And I don't necessarily think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's ridiculous here in the United States. So I'm very critical of the education system in general because it was designed to basically create factory workers, right? Yeah. Be used to working. I worked for 45 minutes or 55 minutes, and there's a 5 minute, like this kind of regimented process. And, I think, I would love it if there were schools that were more like project based almost and had a more free flowing, in ways to learn that are just more interesting than the classroom experience. And yet we buy into it, right? I mean, my wife and I, we have one daughter, and we pay for her to go to she's in middle school, just starts high school next year. And, the tuition is significantly higher than our mortgages. And like, thank God we only have one child so we can afford it. But if we had 2 or 3 children, right, which you're talking about, we wouldn't be able to. And
yeah.
It's a really skewed system here in the United States. But I don't know if your listeners really care about my theories on educational philosophies.
Look, this is the whole thing, right? And I said this to Tori last, and I always say it all the time, is that I'm interested in the person behind the games and their ideas and everything that they produce, because I think the more you find out about the person and where they stand in life, it helps you understand why you make the games that you want to make, and you also produce the fun that you want to produce as well. So I think it's always kind of highly kind of interested. We're lucky in Scotland at the moment in terms of education that if my kids are going to university, they don't have to pay fees to go to university. University education in Scotland is still free.
Wow.
If you're coming from outside of Scotland, however, there are fees that you pay. But if you're a citizen in Scotland, you don't have to pay it. If you go down, like if you literally go 100 miles across the border down into England, you start having to pay kind of £9,000 a year, which to me is just like you're literally telling somebody in order to get the best step possible in life, you've got to take £36,000 worth of debt into you, which is just, again, it's like your hypothesis about training people to become factory workers. It's like, well, the easiest way to stop somebody from being able to achieve greatness or wherever they could be is to first of all lumber them with like, 30 or 40,000 pounds worth of debt as they kind of start. Moving on. This is like, right, so we're going to be talking about like political kind of board games. So let's start off with a healthy dose of, let's have a starter of politics and starter of Doctor Who. So Doctor Who was like the starter, and then we're having a little kind of aperitif with some politics. But in
so I
terms
guess we should
of
talk about cricket now.
I don't understand. I can't get over people who like cricket.
Cricket is a brilliant sport. You're like most Americans.
Cricket
that was meant
like,
as an insult too.
I like cricket's like golf. It's like, as Rabbie Burns said about golf, it's a waste of a good walk. And cricket is just what cricket's like. It's right up there with. I'm sure it's wonderful if you get into it. I've just never. You know what? It's not that. I've just never spent the time and sat down and went, yeah, I want to learn this. It's just a bit complicated. Anything with like overs and throwing and stuff like that. Do you play? Have you played cricket?
I've never played cricket. I used to have a tech company, and I had an employee from South Africa.
Yeah,
and he was trying to convince me that we should go see the World Cup, which was down in the Caribbean. And I was pretty skeptical. And he's like, "No, you're going to love this sport." So he brought in all his gear and explained the game. And I'm still an American, so I like the short version of the game, right? Like a 3-hour game, not a 5-day game. But yeah, I'm all in. It's awesome. So
you can't say that because like American football goes on for years. I mean, it's literally one of these things. It's like I remember seeing comments about it's like somebody complaining about soccer and saying like, or football, proper football, saying only lasts 90 minutes, and they and they always have to end up having kind of some kind of final, and it's like it's never ever high scoring, and it's like American football isn't high scoring. It's just that you decided that when somebody scores a touchdown, you give them 7 points or whatever instead of 1. I mean, that's and I've seen the Super Bowl. It's like, and now we're into our 7th hour of the Super Bowl, which obviously people are going to be shouting at their podcast players at the moment, but I don't care. Bring it on. So, did you enjoy? Because cricket to me is like a picnic. As in, it seems to be quite. There's periods of like massive amounts of kind of energy and people things getting exciting. But generally, it sounds like the cricket to me sounds like the type of thing you could take a little bit of a picnic. You can kind of
Well,
watch. It's not too strenuous on the eyes.
The longer version of the games are like that, but T20, I mean, that's a 3-hour game, which is a little on the long side still, but that's great. And like every ball matters. Like it's intense, and the way they play it in the Caribbean in particular is with a pretty great flair. And it's not. I don't think it's dull at all. But
you said
that's me.
You said like a convert.
I am.
Said like
I've turned my back on American sports, and now all I watch is real football and cricket. So
you'd started drinking tea yet, Kevin?
I think it was the Doctor Who that I watched as a child.
Oh wow, so you're literally you're a UK citizen in waiting. You're just going to be come over here. When the refugees start to move over from America when it falls apart, because it might just do that. That's going to be the test. It's going to be like a line and say, right, okay, who wants to come and live in the UK? And it's going to be like, okay, has anybody watched cricket? And has anybody like football? And then you're going to be putting your hands up and you're going to get straight to the front of the queue.
Nice.
You're going to be fine.
And I watched Murder in Paradise, so like I touch all the requirements for citizenship.
Oh dear. Which Murder in Paradise is it you watch? Is it the one with the latest one, Ralph Little, or is it the Arden O'Hanlon, or?
Well, I've watched all of the seasons up until I'm not sure who. So they're a little bit delayed here. That we get them from Amazon Prime. So,
all right.
But I've watched from. Actually, I think the very first guy who was only one season.
Might
have been the best. I don't remember any of their names, but that show is like that's like the perfect just little snack television. You don't have to think at all.
No.
Right? It's just like awesome. Like, and that's about the only thing that both my wife and I watch anymore together. That and sports. So.
You never ever would want to live there. It's like, let's go to paradise. It's like no chance, because if I know
people
I'm new,
dropping like crazy,
and I'm just turning up for the first time with my holiday bags, I'm dead within the first 15 minutes of me arriving there, because that's how these things kind of happen. It's like Jessica Fletcher, the famous serial killer, Jessica Fletcher, who went around basically on a callous murdering spree. And then
setting up other people, yes.
framed hundreds of other people. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're up in like a mountain shack, right? And there's like, oh, this is peaceful. It's like, this is wonderful. I just love the view and everything like that. And it's like we get on with the animals, and everybody kind of looks after each other and gets on with each other. Then Jessica Fletcher turns up, and literally within a day and a half, there's a dead body who's been skewered by some kind of elk statue that they had in the hallway, kind of thing. So, everybody talks about. I mean, you look at the body count. I reckon Jessica Fletcher's like right up there. Everybody's talking Hannibal Lecter. At least Hannibal Lecter was out in the open when he wanted to kill people. Jessica Fletcher, and he
recycled too. So
exactly,
yeah.
Jessica Fletcher.
The Flash.
Terrible woman.
Terrible.
Sweet innocent old lady, I tell you. She was anything but. So when you left college, just bringing it, try to claw it back. Try to claw it back like some kind of wild animal trying to get out of a cage. When you left college, what were you doing kind of employment wise?
I was working in the tech industry. So I started an online magazine called Journal X, Generation X, looks at politics. And then I worked for, a publicly traded company and an IT trade association doing their web stuff. And because I'm definitely better with numbers than I am with words. And so that kind of natural does where more my affinity was for getting things done. And then I had a couple companies. And while working in the tech industry is fine, it's actually kind of sucks also. And so I definitely prefer doing what I'm doing now because, like, I get up in the morning, I write some stuff, I play some games, I do a little marketing, I make sure my games are being produced in a factory. It's like I get to do a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing what I want to do now. It's fun.
What made you, because I take it when you must have been playing, kind of getting into kind of like your board games, and then what made you decide, actually, I'm just going to go ahead and make this into something? Because it was Shores of Tripoli is your baby, isn't it? I mean, that's kind
Yes.
of like,
So what kicked it off is that I was reading a book about the First Barbary War, and as I do, I'll go down a rabbit hole, and so I'll read a couple other books to get different perspectives, and I was like, oh, there must be a great game because this is such a fascinating historical episode, and there weren't any games, so I set about designing one, and it helps that like Jason Matthews, who designed Twilight Struggle, is one of my closest friends. So, I'm sort of, you have kind of like a orbit of folks that you can, and being in DC, I mean, Volker Runke lives here and Elizabeth Hargrave lives here. Like you have a kind of a lot of different, very well-known designers.
You just name drop it now, Kevin. You just name drop. Do you hang about? Is there like kind of things where you just like hang about and it's like, yeah, I was me and just Elizabeth Hargrave, just like, hanging about at the 7-Eleven,
Not quite
drink.
like that. But like Jason and I go to baseball games all the time.
Yeah.
This Saturday we're going to the ballpark and he's bringing his kids and we're going to go out on the field and do batting practice and stuff. And then I've like Volko, he hosts, he's a vegan, so he doesn't like to go anywhere where there's not vegan food. So he never comes to the ballpark. But he hosts games at his house. And so I have a sauerkraut sandwich and then usually get beat, which is really annoying. But yeah. So yeah, it's a great place to be a game player, Washington, D.C. Like, it's awesome.
What was how long were you developing Shores of Tripoli for?
So I think the first play test was in December of 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2017, I started shopping at 2 other publishers and realized that they weren't going to give it the love that I would give it. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to publish it myself instead. And so I set up Fort Circle in June of 2017 and went from there. So, but it didn't get published till 2020, right? It took time, right? We ran a Kickstarter campaign in 2019, but I went through an extensive development process. We had, 600 playtesters or something absurd like that, which is good. And that's, one of the things we always try to do. And then, the pandemic slowed things down a little bit, so the game didn't come out till the end of 2020. But, moderately well received, so I can't complain too much.
It's been, I wouldn't say moderately well received. I think it seems, it's very kind of well put together. And for I did kind of like, I've played it a reasonable number of times. And what I found about it was there wasn't, sometimes with war games or these simulation games, there can be a little bit of faff about them, if you know what I mean. You feel like you kind of like it's like me talking. You could get to a point an awful lot quicker, and sometimes there's just like extra stuff that's kind of added in there. And what I found with Shores of Tripoli was it was a fairly kind of lean kind of experience. And I said this in the review, which was you kind of where the journey's going. You know where you're kind of going, but the prospect as you're playing through it, you never kind of feel it's in a kind of almost like a controlled environment that it kind of feels balanced and it follows kind of like the flow. So you've got like the introduction of the kind of the army that's coming in. You've got like the additional naval help from Sweden if I'm wrong.
Sweden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got that kind of coming in. And these are things that you kind of introduce, but they're kind of introduced in a kind of a balanced, kind of piecemeal manner. But also at the same time, on the design notes, because you're quite unusual that you give an actual design. It's quite unusual because I see some designers kind of give design notes, but usually their inspiration and their thoughts behind the game is something that they kind of bring out in kind of like an interview. Was it did you a conscious decision and say, like, I'm going to write down kind of my thoughts and feelings about the kind of the game and things that I had to take out and things that weren't in the game and stuff like that? Was it a conscious decision to actually produce that as part of the overall game as well?
Kind of. So obviously the historical essay was super important to me,
Mm-hmm.
and that was written by a woman who's now a professor at the U.S. Naval Academy, where the
Mm-hmm.
game is used in the classroom. And that I knew that was a must-have. And the designer's notes I wrote basically for myself if I was buying this game. I'm like, what would be the things I would be curious about?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote it as if I was buying the game, not knowing anything about it, but like, well, why did they do this? And why did they do this? And so that's the kind of questions I'm always curious about. And so that's why I wrote it that way. We'll probably do a second printing next year, and I might tighten that essay up a little bit. I don't think it's necessarily my best work, but in general, I was happy with the direction of it. So to kind of get a feel for why I did the things I do. Not to exactly change the subject, but I have a Substack that it's called Negotium Ludorum, which is the business of games in Latin. And I talk a lot about, like, all right, here's why we're changing how we're doing shipping, or here's why we're changing how we're doing this, or here's why we do this, and here's the cost of this. Because I find that kind of, business history, I guess, or development history really interesting. And I know everybody doesn't, but at least some people do. And so I'm sort of writing towards those like-minded souls, I guess.
No, I mean, I totally understand it. I know that there's a few people that kind of do kind of like designer diaries. I know that Frank West does a regular one. Obviously, Jamie Stegmaier is kind of famous for doing his blog, and he kind of, because there still seems to be a little bit of, not secrecy, but I think because board game manufacturing and production and a lot of the journeys that people go through, they go through them by themselves. So they'll decide to Kickstarter something, and then it's like, yep, we managed to get this Kickstarted, and we managed to kind of get it out to you. And a lot of people don't share the kind of the individual journeys of that. I don't know if sometimes it's in case somebody goes, you could have done it this way and it would have saved you 3 months, and they're like going, oh, okay. But I think it takes it's almost like a little bit of courage to kind of put yourself out there and say, okay, this is why we did this is why we did that. Especially I can imagine in the kind of the factual gaming kind of community. And obviously the wargaming side of things, I can imagine that if you hadn't said that, I know that we kind of like, I think you mentioned in the design notes, you're talking about the kind of like the frigates I think the Americans used. You make a note on that. And I read it and I kind of went, oh, nobody's going to comment on that. And they went, no, correct yourself, because I think there would probably be somebody that would be like, I'm sure you probably kind of get, if you went onto the BGG kind of page within, or, some of the wargaming forums and Shores of Tripoli is brought up, you'd probably get somebody that would complain about the kind of the colour of the yellow isn't really actually the yellow that's in the kind of the Swedish flag. I think you'll find that the Pantone for this is this colour, and I think that the one that you've used is actually that colour instead, kind of thing, for that particular time of year, kind of thing.
If they care enough to do the research on that, God bless them.
Is it too early and too public to say congratulations for the Charles Roberts nomination for Votes for Women?
Well, that's a sticky issue.
Shall we not talk about that then?
No, I'm happy to. On one side, there are some people who are very, their sense of the world has been upset a little bit by that nomination.
Right.
But then on the flip side, I'm there's an award for like best presentation, and I really think that Votes for Women should have been one of those 5. But reasonable people can disagree, so no big deal on that. The one that I'm a little peeved about is that Tori did not get a nomination for Best New Designer.
Yeah.
They only had 3, and I'm not meaning to take anything away from the 3 nominations there were, but usually there's up to 5 nominations in these categories. I certainly was a little shocked that Tori was not one of the boys enlisted. So, but maybe that has something to do with it.
I mean, talking of that, when Tori was kind of regaling the tale of how Votes for Women kind of came around, they said that basically, well, they came to you and said, what about this idea about, the kind of the suffrage, the 19th Amendment, the kind of the suffrage struggle, and you turned around and basically said, well, that sounds wonderful, go away and make it. Was it like that? Did you actually say, right, off your trot then, and go and get it made?
Mostly yes, but I'd been thinking about it also, and I think I'd even kind of started dropping the hints to her, and then she thought it was her idea, so it worked out. That was my brilliant plan. It was something like that. I'm gonna go with it. When in doubt, print the legend.
And how much involvement was there back and forth? Was it 90% kind of her effort with 10% of guidance from yourself, or did you kind of like try and consciously kind of stay away from it as much as possible, just to see what kind of happened?
So the research part was 99% her. About the only input I had on that is I was born in the state of Montana. Jeanette Rankin was the first congresswoman ever elected. I was like, we got to have a card for her, and that meant a lot to me. And but other than that, she was all the research. When it came to the mechanics and talking through the mechanics, that was really much more of a team effort. Obviously, the mechanics lean into 1960 and to a lesser extent Watergate, and kind of classic card-driven games. And so, she was building on that base. But we had a lot of discussions, and Jason Matthews had a lot of input, and then the rest of our senior play testers, my wife, who was one of the more senior play testers, who involved, like, what are the mechanisms and how do they relate to what really happened historically? And so, that was a much broader team that worked on that. Obviously, Tori deserves all the credit, or the majority of the credit, however, but that was a broader team that worked on that. And I'm really pleased with some of the things that ended up coming about from it. Like, we know a lot of people don't like dice rolling, and we're like, well, how do we mitigate that? Yeah. And the notion that organizational strength leads to better outcomes was where the buttons came about. Because they're not just a currency, right? Yeah. They are representative of, you've invested in your organizational infrastructure, therefore you're more likely to win court cases or to win elections or whatever. And so I was really happy with that. I like one of the very few things that I definitely suggested for the mechanisms is the cards that you draw, where it allows you to draw 2 events and play one. Yeah. Those are all books, and that was my recommendation, because I'm like, books allow folks to have a broader thought, and therefore you have access to more ideas, which is access to more cards. That was probably my real contribution to the whole effort. So, and then we had an extensive playtest. We sent out 100 playtest kits, which cost a great deal of money. I'm not sure I'm going to quite do that many for future games, and that was really helpful because a lot of people get really good feedback. They're like, this doesn't quite work here, or this doesn't work here, or this seems a little convoluted. So we're able to, lean into all the playtesters' comments to streamline it appropriately. Try to get that playtime down to, first play might be 90 minutes, but if you're an experienced player, 60, 65 minutes. Yeah, I'm super thrilled with how that turned out.
Is it, in terms of playtesting then, would you consider for the future kind of looking towards a kind of a more electronic environment, as in kind of like your Tabletopia or your Tabletop Simulator?
So it's interesting. So David Thompson swears by Tabletop Simulator, and we're publishing a game that he's co-designing with Liz Davidson on the Night Witches, and that's where almost all their playtesting has been. But it's working for them. For me, I need to play a game and like go through the physical things that the player is doing, where they're moving things, make sure the layout and ergonomics of the game design are right. And if you're making changes, right, you make them on TTS, you really don't see what happens. Or if you're playing it on a board, like you feel it and you see it and you get it. And so, I think probably the future is some kind of hybrid of that, where you have a group of physical playtesters and you have a group of online playtesters.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about, from my own personal view, is like I will quite happily jump on to, say, Board Game Arena and play a game that I've already played. But I find it really, really difficult to learn a game that I haven't played before on Board Game Arena. I've jumped on and I've played like Viticulture, and I've played, you play like Don't Stop and all the, the classics and stuff like that. And, even things like, quite just a few kind of like different games I've kind of like played online. But the TTS stuff, it's okay, but I kind of look on it as a kind of like a simulation. And there was something about one of the things that I said about Votes for Women, and even, okay, and let's go back Shores of Tripoli as well, is I really love the chunkiness of the counters that you have in Shores of Tripoli. Even when I was playing that game, right, and you had like your gold pieces that you were for your tributes, it's hard not to actually pick them up and physically kind of like, you're
Play
almost
like
physically connecting with them like poker chips. You're basically saying kind of like, look, this is my kind of loot, or this is my tribute that I've managed to kind of gain. And the ships were kind of chunky, and just the feel of the cardstock. And it's not like a big game. It doesn't take up a huge amount of space, and even once you've got the cards in. But it was the same like Votes for Women, with the crosses and the ticks and the crosses. There was something very, very tactile about physically being able to handle those pieces and kind of put them out on the table. Even like the senator columns, the pillars for the Senate, there's something kind of really, really nice. I don't know if it's maybe just a little bit of Luddite in me. I'm quite happy to jump on to like, I'll play Ticket to Ride on the phone app. I've even played Galaxy Trucker, which for me was just weird. And I have played kind of Kickstarter demo versions, but I guess I assume I kind of tie in Tabletop Simulator too much with a kind of almost like a prototype type thing. And I understand the power of it, and I can totally understand. I can see how Liz and David would use it, because they're on, I think I don't think they live too close to each other. I know that Liz and David have got both kind of busy day jobs as well. So I can imagine the thing to do would be, let's put this all together in one place and not have to worry. And I guess in the playtesting side of things, you could just handle out TTS codes to a lot of people and get them to play them. But I must say, if I was then looking to get kind of if I got into the physical playtesting, I'd probably do what you did, and I'd probably end up with a pair of scissors and some wooden dowels, and actually kind of physically making the components before I kind of sent them out.
Well, and I think a lot of people are attracted to games that are tactile, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, you feel your shit. I mean, frankly, I wish the wood was heavier. Like I
Mhm.
got the heaviest wood that they can produce, and but yeah, like you feel your pieces and like or the visual of those crosses or ticks as you call them on the board, right? Like you can physically feel, see like
Yeah.
your impending doom or not, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I just don't think you can replicate that online. It's not as good of an experience. And so even if we do, some playtesting online, I'm, despite working in the tech industry, I am kind of a neo-Luddite in ways, right? Like I want a board game to look good on the board. When I was in college, I worked at a game store. The Gamekeeper is a chain of like, I don't know, 40 stores, mostly in the West. And like the chess sets that we sold were gorgeous, right? Like
Yeah.
you're buying that not to play chess. You're buying that so it looks good
It just
while you
gets
play
displayed on
chess.
the table. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And the idea with Shores of Tripoli and Votes for Women and the other games that we come out with, the idea is they are good games to play, but they also look good, and they can be used to entice people who are maybe game curious or history buffs who aren't gamers, and
Yeah.
bring them onto the cause.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you do look at, even if you look at like Twilight Struggle, which is a classic, and the color scheme's absolutely fabulous. But it's still, if you just look at the board, it looks like, oh, where does this go? Where does this go? And I've seen kind of like some of the more in-depth kind of war games, which are like hexes and squares and cards and a map, and that's kind of it. And there's not, it's like somebody would go, so what's this like? And it's like, this is the best game ever made. And it's like, it doesn't look like I don't know if I'm just like being kind of like an art snob, but I think you're right. If one of the things about Shores of Tripoli was it's a primary color festival. You've got your reds, you've got your yellows, you've got your oranges, you've got your golds, you've got the board. The board itself is so that when people come over, they're going to be looking at it and going, so what's this game then? And Votes for Women, it's graphical design and stuff like that. Again, everything down to the graphical design on the cards, to the kind of the board itself. And once you get all the ticks and crosses out, it certainly kind of looks kind of inviting. Now with Votes for Women being as received as well as it has been, and Shores of Tripoli being received as well as it has been as well, has that, and you're talking about like Halls of Montezuma, which is a game coming up. You've got Guana. Has that enticed you to look at kind of topics external to kind of like your modern or your kind of your historical kind of wargaming and say, what else can we potentially kind of gamify here? What could we make a game, or is that a bit of a struggle?
Well, I mean, if I wanted to make money, I'd make some fantasy game with cute little animals or dragons or whatever, right? But I guess I don't want to make money, so that's why I stick to historical topics. But so we were pitched a design on D-Day, and I have to be honest, the design was pretty good. I really like it. I'll buy it when it comes out, but I decided not to publish it because there's already several hundred games on D-Day, and I don't know this game added anything to it, and it was a little loose on the history, and I'm like, oh yeah, right,
yeah. And for the purposes of the tape, I would just like to say I've brought up evidence marked ABC, which is the Undaunted Reinforcements box, which is fully full of Undaunted and D-Day.
So yeah, I definitely want to do interesting topics. Maybe the furthest afield I would go from history is maybe an alternative history. Jason Matthews and I have been talking about a game where you're John F. Kennedy and you survive the assassination attempt. And so then you have to get reelected, deal with both foreign policy crises, particularly Vietnam, and the civil rights movement, and identify who killed you. Which, like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? Like, I know who killed Kennedy, but kind of give into maybe the Cubans were behind it, maybe the right, like, and so you're trying to solve who was behind the attack, and I think that would be a really great game, but it is obviously not a historical game, so that's maybe the furthest afield I'm probably willing to go. And we might not even publish that as Fort Circle. We might put it under an imprint brand because we don't want, I don't want people to think we're conspiracy theorists. John F. Kennedy's actually alive or something with Elvis down in the Caribbean. But
you could just put like a little mark down the circle and make it look like Q Fort Circle games.
Yes, I don't.
Let's
think
not do that.
Doing that.
Let's not. There's enough of that. It's like you joke about it, but there's enough people that are like, it's like they've got that "I want to believe" poster above their desk, and they certainly kind of believe. But have you not thought of like kind of doing like a Richard Bachman, as Stephen King did, and kind of make kind of like a resource management kind of game, but in a kind of a war game, but in a kind of a cutesy format type thing?
I think the Guano game comes a little close to that. Because, right, so in Guano, game won't come out till probably end of next year. But describing it for the folks, you start with a small company, you have you and 2 ships, and it's basically a worker placement game. And you explore new islands, which you find more birds and bats and there's different kinds of birds. And so you'll put little cute bird meeples on the islands, and they are creating excrement that then you're selling. And then you're turning that into Gilded Age baubles. So you're turning shit into gold. And that's just kind of cool, right? And that's a little cutesy. And I also, and my wife is the lead designer on that, and I think that would be our bestseller. I think it may even outsell David Thompson's game. So we'll see.
Is Kate currently in the room? Is that why you're saying that out loud then?
Well, she's in the attached room that there's no door to. It's an open.
Oh, right. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to say hi, Kate? Hi. There we go. Yeah.
But you've got Guano. You've got Halls of Montezuma as well. Are there other things kind of planned? Are you, with the kind of the connections that you have and stuff like that, are you looking at potentially games kind of outside the Fort Circle brand, kind of bigger collaborations and stuff like that? You mentioned talking to kind of like, you must speak to obviously David Thompson.
Well, David Thompson may be a vampire because he never sleeps, and he pushes out 12 designs a year and has a day job. So obviously, it's going to take 8 companies to publish all his work alone. So I don't see us doing any kind of partnership with Osprey or something like that. Doesn't make sense. I don't even know what that would look like. I'm really happy with kind of the games we have lined up. We have Halls of Montezuma, and then we have a game called First Monday in October, which is about the history of the Supreme Court, which Talia Rosen, local attorney here, designed. Then we have Hunt for Blackbeard, which is by Vocal Runke. That'll probably be the next game after that. We're designing a game about Shakespeare's first folio for the Folger Shakespeare Library here in town. But I'm not sure if we're going to release that as us or under the Folger Library brand, because they're a museum and they actually have more first folios than anybody in England, which is kind of typical American. Well, it's Standard Oil money that funded all that stuff back in the day. And then we have this game on Guano. We have Jason Matthews has 2 games, one about the King Edward VIII and Wallace Simpson abdication. And then on the Treason Trial of Aaron Burr, we have a game on the history of Washington, D.C. We have a couple other designs we're looking at. Maybe some labor, Tori probably will work on a game on the labor movement. So this is kind of a broad. Oh, and of course, Night Witches by Liz and David. So like, we are looking at kind of a broad group of games, right? And now the onus is now that the pandemic has mostly run its course as far as affecting production and shipping. Now can we be publishing 3, 4, 5 games a year? And that's what I'm focused on. Like, I need to stop, going to baseball games and watching cricket and soccer, and need to work a little bit harder so I can get all these games out so people can enjoy them.
What about a cricket game then? What about a cricket game? You can't, what about a cricket game, Kevin? How's that?
So I that's funny. I actually did kind of draft out a design of what a cricket game would look like.
Yeah.
But I sort of play tested it myself, and even play a T10 game would take an hour. So like a T20 game would take 2 hours. And at that point I'm like, oh, that's too long. Probably not. So, there's a game, there's a design I'm working on that I actually love though. Have you ever played Republic of Rome?
I've heard of it, but I have not played it.
Have you ever played Dune Imperium?
Yes.
So I would say it is a mix of Republic of Rome and Dune Imperium set during George Washington's two terms of presidency, so 8 years. And you're all of the, you're Burr and Jefferson and Hamilton and Adams, and you're all trying to get your way to be the next president once George Washington leaves the scene. And with all the historical personalities and all the backbiting, and so it's got kind of a Dune Imperium feel where you're drafting in or getting different people to come to your side to be part of your team. And then you're dealing with England and France, which is kind of similar to how the tracks work in Dune Imperium. But then there's these crises that come up that it's somewhat cooperative, because if you don't resolve them, enough of them will crash the country and you all lose. So I'm really excited about that, but I don't think that might not be till like 2026. Frankly, that's pretty far out.
Yeah, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, because I know that there's some people that they've not got the plan there, or that's like, what can we do next? And I know that. I think the pandemic, one of the things, it kind of reduced a lot of businesses to almost like a hand-to-mouth kind of basis. Because, am I right in saying Votes for Women was on Kickstarter, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
So we Kickstarted it in 2020.
Yeah.
And it was a little rushed. Like the product, like I took it down, the video that we used, because it had some things that, we changed quite a bit of stuff from that initial design. And I was expecting we'd deliver it in 2021. And then what happened, I think what a lot of people miss is, there's all these shipping woes. Well, that's one thing. But so then the factories had made a bunch of games that weren't being shipped. And so they're just sitting there. So then the factories are like, well, we can't make any more games. And so that knocked us out of 2021 into 2022. And so we took that time to make a better game, and I'm really happy we did. Like, the extensive play testing, really was super valuable. And then, and so we got knocked off our schedule. Like, the big companies who had already had a lot of inventory, I mean, those companies did great because there was this pent up demand for board games. But newer companies who are trying to get product developed was just a nightmare. Not a nightmare. It was a challenge. It was an opportunity in corporate speak. But so now, the shipping prices are back to normal. I mean, production prices are higher because of inflation, but they're not terrible. Yeah. And so, I think we're kind of on a normal path, and we survived. Whereas, certainly we see that some game companies have not survived. So I'm glad we survived.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, you seem pretty sociable fella, because you've got your own little con. Am I right that you run?
Yes. Circle DC.
Circle DC.
Yeah. So
that must. How did that come about then?
Well, so Tori and I, as she probably related, we did debate, and I really enjoyed hosting debate tournaments. And so, like in the 2010 to 15 era, I was working with embassies here in DC to host debate tournaments and colleges, mostly from the States, but like some teams from Africa and some teams from Europe and some teams from Canada would come. And it was really super fun. I really enjoy kind of that kind of thing. I think if I really had answered my true calling in life, I would have been a wedding planner, because that's the kind of thing I like to do. And so no one's hiring an overweight middle-aged white guy to plan their weddings, so the second best thing is to plan a convention. And so we're really lucky, right? We have all these designers local, and you folks came in and we did some interesting things. So we had a tour of the Pentagon by one of my friends who's a war gamer. He is the war gamer for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Like, that's his job. And so he gave a tour to folks who wanted to sign up for that. And now we're thinking about the things we can do next year. And right, like there's historic cruises, there's tours of the Capitol, because we're making this game about the Supreme Court. We're working with the Supreme Court Historical Society, so they're super cool. Our project with the Folger Shakespeare Library, it's all downtown DC. So, we're trying to think about, we want people to come and play games. We probably want to add kind of an academic track so we can, think about games in a slightly more serious context, but then we want to do cool shit. And I think that DC is one of the coolest places to do things. Yeah. So, so that's sort of where that comes from. And I hate going to conventions because I never kind of know what my role is. Like, if I'm teaching games, okay, I know what my role is, but I don't just like roll up to someone and say, hey, let's play a game. Like, I'm not that extroverted. Yeah. But since it's my convention, I can do whatever I want. I'm like, come on in.
It's my party.
And so you don't like it, you can leave. So that's, I think I should just host 2 conventions and not go to any conventions. I'd be happy with that. So
you need to run it. I think there's a convention board game.
Yeah.
There has to be some kind of resource planning convention type board game.
I was watching, so when I was playtesting the Shores of Tripoli, I saw someone who had a game about attending a game convention. So it wasn't about hosting it, it was about going and you had to, I don't know. Yeah. And I was just like, yawn, like, that's not fun. Like, I guess I'm a little more grounded in the games I want to play. Like, games about artichokes and antelopes and whatever are fine, but they're not really the games I like to play. So I like to play, like Terraforming Mars. We have a mission. We're trying to terraform Mars, and our corporation would be the best.
I'd love to be art director for Terraforming Mars because there's so many things I would do. So many things. There's so many things like that. Do you know what Terraforming Mars is? Terraforming Mars is a pair of Crocs. That's not saying it's a Croc. What I'm saying, it's a pair of Crocs, right? It's a really, really good kind of practical application, and I can understand why there's certain people that find it comfortable. And for a lot of people, it is their comfort game. They will slip on a pair of Crocs and they'll put Terraforming Mars on the table and they'll play it. And, they'll not be able to go out in cold weather in it. They'll not be able to go out in the rain wearing their Crocs. They'll not even be able to go out in the snow. If it gets too hot, the Crocs will get too hot, but they like their Crocs. And there's so many things that I would take with Terraforming Mars and kind of change it on a slight kind of practical level just to kind of make it. And people do already, which is the funniest thing about it. And they're the fierce defenders of it.
I'll agree with you and disagree with you.
That's
I think the gameplay is pretty solid. Like, and it's pretty easy to teach. Like, it's got a lot of value in that. As how it looks on the table is an embarrassment, right? Yeah. Like, some of those cards are terrible.
Yep.
And
it's a set of Crocs.
From an artwork, yeah. So, I guess I mostly agree. But I think it's a good game. I mean, it's easy to teach to people. People get the metaphor, what you're doing, and that counts for a lot. So,
Yeah.
And it's sold more copies than Votes for Women. So,
time's gonna tell on that. I think
that's true. We'll see.
time's gonna tell on that. Time's gonna tell on that. If people have listened along and they want to just keep in contact and just keep an eye on your little fort circle, where do you exist on the internet webs, Mr. Bertram?
So I'm fairly active on Twitter at Fort Circle. Our website is fortcircle.com.
Yes.
And then I write about the business of games at budorum.substack.com. And I should link that for my Twitter bio, but I don't. But I'll get on that. So yeah, those are the main places.
And what we'll do is we'll make sure we take all of those links and we'll put them in the show notes so that we have got notes to show. And if you want to keep an eye on what we're up to, just go to the internet webs and search for We're Not Wizards and you'll find us in all the various different places. We've got the blog, we've got our Twitter account as well, we've got our Instagram account, we've got our Facebook group. We're just everywhere like some kind of hot summer rash, which isn't itchy enough to be annoying and make you get cream, but kind of is just kind of always there in
a
the
multimedia
background.
empire.
Multimedia empire. Indeed. And also, if you've liked what you listened to tonight, go on to your podcast catcher of choice and drop us a rating or review. If you are going to be giving us a rating or review, remember not to give us 10 stars because it makes me big-headed. I don't need to be any more big-headed. But at the same time, don't give me 1 star because it makes us cry. Give me something in the middle, like a 5, because it's average. I'm just a little bit average. But the person who's not been average is rather wonderful, rather fantastic, came full circle with his forts while standing on the shores of Tripoli and looking at his votes for women and making sure the whole thing doesn't turn to guano. It's Kevin Bertram. Thank you very, very much for guesting, Kevin.
It's my pleasure.
And there's only 2 more things to do. The first thing is to remember that we're many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Kevin?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. And the next thing is to say goodbye. So it's a goodbye from Kevin. Say goodbye, Kevin.
Goodbye, Kevin.
And it's a goodbye from me. Remember, stay safe, roll 6s, make something awful. And if you're liking a bit of history, but then you look at the history books and you're just like, they're history books and they're a bit dull and they're a bit dusty and they're a bit grey and they're a bit boring. You want a little bit more excitement of your history, then get yourself to Fort Circle Games. Until the next time, goodbye.
A wizard is never late. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.